So I did 5 marathons in 5 days, completely fasted, but I'd never actually even done a marathon before. Because back then it was weird. I was the guy with two heads that was like, you're doing stuff that is bizarre, which is just cut out the processed foods, don't eat the grains, just stick to whole foods, and away you go. So that's what I did, loved it. And then from there it was, if I feel this good, how much further can I take it? The key was, can you become fat adapted and then do this amount of work, which is 132 miles is what I ended up running with on just my body fat reserves. The energy reserves is one thing, but you wear out your body along the way. And it's not as though that being fat adapted means that you're invincible and every part of you just never breaks down. And my body showed the signs of wear and tear. The thinking that, okay, because I didn't have carbohydrates and I wasn't eating, my blood sugar would struggle during that period was completely false. It was rock solid the entire time. My body was able to regulate that for the entire 5 days.
So Alex, it's great to have you here. Interesting accomplishment you have there. I guess what I saw was that you had run 5 marathons consecutively fasted, which is one marathon by itself with food. It's hard enough, but 5 of them without eating is quite crazy, perhaps, if anything. So tell me, maybe just start us back. Give us a little history on your background. What got you into marathon running? What propelled you to do something like this?
So you're right. It's insane what I did, and a lot of people would think the same. But the reason I got into it had absolutely nothing to do with marathon running, and I'm not a runner whatsoever. So I did 5 marathons in 5 days, completely fasted, as you said, but I'd never actually even done a marathon before attempting this. And the reason that I got into this was take a step back. I've been, call it, in the low-carb keto space for about 14 years now is when I first dived into it, and I've been doing it for a very long time. And once you scratch the surface, you learn a few things and you go a bit deeper, and from there, you have all the benefits that compound over time. So I started out paleo, moved into more keto, and these days, for probably the last 5 years, I've been a complete carnivore. Now, over that time, through what I'd learned was one little nugget that I really wanted to test out, which was the understanding or the theory that when you're adhere to a ketogenic diet for long enough, and particularly a carnivore diet, reduce those carbohydrates, your body becomes fat adapted. And in doing so, you really unlock, in my case, 50 times more energy than you otherwise would through what you can obtain from your glycogen or carbohydrate stores. So the reason I did my 5 marathons was really for myself, just to test that out. It was, okay, step 1, become fat adapted and get my body utilizing its fat stores as efficiently as possible. And then do something, whatever that happens to be, to demonstrate the amount of energy that I have and to test that out. Not being a runner at all, it was running within my skill set, as with everyone. Marathons are a good numeraire because everyone understands how hard and how far a marathon is. And doing it for 5 days also meant that you could strike a line through the fact that, was I getting my energy reserves from anywhere else other than my own body? So that was the reason for doing it fasted. And along the way, look, I wanted to test everything. So track all the data that I could, just because everyone has a lot of theories around what would happen to one's body when they were to do such a thing. And by tracking that data, it meant I had some actual real numbers that obviously apply to me, but really show what happens to someone when they put themselves through that. And it was some fascinating insights that be more than happy to share.
Yeah, and I want to get into this. But the 5 marathons done consecutively over 5 different days, were these official competitions, or you just go out and track the distance and run it yourself?
So trying to find official marathons over that period, back to back, there's just nowhere that you can do it without having to travel around the world. So my plan was, I finished with the official Sydney Marathon. So that was an actual event. So that was my 5th marathon. And the 4 prior were just me running essentially a marathon course, there's a course out at Western Sydney where they held the Western Sydney Marathon. I'd run a course around there for the 4 days. And it literally was just me. So just clock the miles, do this each day, and then finish with the official marathon, as for a few reasons. One, being an official marathon meant that it would give me a bit of a boost and a bit of a buzz, because after 4 days of running by yourself, actually running with the crowd and doing the rest was a great way to finish.
How did you come up with the idea that you're going to do 5 instead of just 2 or 3 or just 1 marathon? What was the determination? I'm going to do 5 of these in a row without ever having to run one before. How did that?
Yeah, so my inspiration actually came from a doctor, Dr. Ian Lake, who you may have come across. So he's a doctor in the UK. He's a GP, a type 1 diabetic. And in 2020, he did something equally crazy. He and 7 others did 100 miles over 5 days, completely fasted. He wrote a medical paper on it, and particularly being a type 1 diabetic, it was incredible to see what he was able to achieve. So having seen that, I thought, you know what, I could do this. Essentially 4 marathons over that 5-day period. I chose 5 because 5 in 5 days just sounds cooler. And I thought, if he can do 4, I can do 5. Let's do that. Without him, honestly, I wouldn't have had the courage to attempt it. So I did. I reached out to him and said, look, can I pick your brain? How does this work? And how should I go about it? Am I on the right track? So I definitely did my homework, but my hat's off to Dr. Ian Lake for really being the pioneer here to do something to demonstrate this. And all I did was just take it that one little step further.
What, you said you've been doing the low-carb ketogenic diets for about, I think you said 14 years or something like that. What got you directed in that direction in the first place? Was there some issue that you decided to do that?
No, it wasn't an issue per se. It was more, look, I came across a guy by the name of Art Devaney, who you may have heard, but he wrote a book around the evolutionary approach for diet. Now, what struck me about him wasn't so much his approach, it was his results. So the guy at the time was mid-60s, like late 60s, and he was running around with his grandkids. He was doing weights. He was fit. He was healthy. He was not only just living life well, he was doing, like, he had the markers and the ability of someone half his age. So when I saw that, I went, you know what? I've got a very inquisitive mind. I saw the results that he was getting, and I said to myself, I'd love to have a piece of that. Like, how good would it be to be 80 and be the first picked by my grandchildren to be on their team because they want me as a great player, not just sitting there on the sidelines. So that's what piqued my interest. And I went, okay, let's do what he did, follow his principles, which were just the evolutionary approach. Don't eat anything that we haven't eaten in the last sort of 20,000 years. And in doing so, let's see where it takes us. So I did that for a month, and I thought I'd feel 10% better. I felt 10,000 times better. And I was like, okay, this is real. And from there, it was, okay, I need to understand this and dig into it. And that's where I started to dig into the science behind it, just to get more of an understanding as to put the pieces together. Because back then it was weird. I was the guy with 2 heads that was like, you're doing stuff that is bizarre, which is, these days it's a little bit more common, which is just cut out the processed foods, don't eat the grains, just stick to whole foods, and away you go. So that's what I did, loved it. And then from there it was, if I feel this good, how much further can I take it?
Yeah, and I think Art Devaney, more of a Paleolithic type approach, lower carb, avoiding level. He's still alive. He's around 87 years old at this point, so he's still kicking around. So that's good for him. So you said you got to get fat adapted. At what point were you fat adapted? Obviously you've been low carb for years, so that was probably many years ago. Did you have to do something additional to improve your ability to handle these marathons?
Not really, because once I found out or decided on doing this challenge, it fitted in pretty neatly to where I was. The key was, can you become fat adapted and then do this amount of work, which is 132 miles is what I ended up running with on just my body fat reserves. So given I was already fat adapted prior, it was like, okay, I've got a bit of a head start here. This is just really right in my wheelhouse of what I could do. And then coming into it, I gave myself a year of training because I hadn't run. So it was just get some kilometers in the legs and work up to that. And then in my diet, I became really strict because when I was doing something that no one in the world has ever done before. So when you're facing the unknown and you're staring into the abyss, it was like, I need to do everything to maximize my probability of achieving this. So my diet was very strict. And for the last 4 years, as I said, I'd been carnivore, but I was having some things that were not carnivore, if you want to be super strict about it. Like I was drinking coffee and I might have a bit of garlic and onions in my meal, but it's really 99% of what I was having was carnivore. But preparing for this, it was 3 months out, nothing but pure carnivore and no carbohydrates whatsoever would cross my lips. And again, in the back of my mind, it was, don't do anything that could compromise my ability to achieve my goal, which was purely just to cover the distance of 5 marathons during a 5-day fast.
So you went very strict carnivore. Obviously, you have to consume fat becomes your fuel source. How was that? How did you fatty meat? What was it? Fat source?
Absolutely, fatty meats. So not a lot really changed with my diet. And like I said, I used to tell everyone, I've got so much energy now, and no one really believes me. And you can scream from the rooftops, and the more you do that, the more people just think you're a weirdo. But it was a nice one for me to be able to say, look, I've now done 5 marathons fasted. You get people's attention. They're like, maybe I should look into this because maybe that energy thing you're talking about is a real thing. And what I ate was, So I'd eat meat, fatty meats, fatty cuts. I'd eat as much fat as I possibly could. But I do it in a natural way. I wouldn't go chasing the fat and I wouldn't go chasing the protein and think about what are my percentages. It was nature's already done all the hard work for us and we've adapted to eat that. So just eat it as it comes. So if the meat comes with fat on it, I'd eat all the fat. And I found that two things. When I eat this way, my satiety is through the roof. So I literally only eat 1 to sometimes 2 meals a day. Not because I choose, it's because eating more than that is really hard work. I have to choose to force food in my mouth. And coming into what I was doing 5 days of fasting, I was trying to overeat a little bit just to think, can I build up some reserves here? But it was really uncomfortable. So I only eat 1 meal a day, sometimes 2. Again, eating the fat and the protein in the way that it comes. But yeah, so fatty meats, beef's my primary. I do eat a little bit of pork, tiny bit of chicken because I find it's not as fatty enough for me and I don't get that satiety. But I do have some dairy, being butter, and certainly a lot of eggs. I enjoy my eggs too.
Okay. And with the flight, I assume you're a pretty lean guy. You didn't have a bunch of excess body fat. You weren't walking around with a big belly when you ran this marathon. Is that fair to say? You're already fairly lean as you went?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it adds even some more power to what I did, because most people think that, okay, if you're a really big fat guy, you've got a lot of reserves there and you're going to be able to do what you did. But I am very lean. So I had DEXA scan before and after to show my change in body composition. And going into it, I was 14% body fat, and which is very lean. Some would say it's not that lean, but I can tell you from the scan, it tells you your percentage in your population. I'm in the top 3%, given how obese kind of the world is at the moment for my age. So I'm definitely lean at 14%. And just doing some maths on that, if we want to talk calories, but that's what people use as their numeraire for energy. So at 14%, I had about 100,000 calories of available energy on me, and some back of the envelope maths I was expecting to use somewhere around 25,000 during that period, which was the combination of what it would take to complete a marathon plus my resting metabolic rate, also how many calories I'd use just by living each day. So that was it. I thought, at worst, I'm going to use about a quarter of my energy fat reserves. But the reality was, according to DEXA, I only lost 1 kilogram of fat during that entire time. So my fat reserves used only 1 kilo out of it was about 11 and a half kilos of fat I had on me. I punched out 5 marathons, didn't eat for 5 days, and I lost 1 kilo of fat. So I think even my estimation of how much energy we have on me, that's less than 10% of my reserves. So it was astounding, to be honest. It was, how far could we actually go? I don't know.
Yeah, that is amazing to think that, because technically a kilo of fat would get you, we would say 7,000 calories or something like that, based on what we tend to think as a pound of fat is 3,500 calories or something along those lines. Because what about times? Because people say, yeah, anybody can walk a marathon or something. What was the intensity like? What were your times on these things? And I'm just curious how the first one compared to the last one. My expectation is, you think because of fatigue, you get worse at the end, but some people, they lose weight during this and then they're carrying less weight around. So what were your times like, and how did they progress through the 5 days?
Sure. So my intention here was to demonstrate how far I could go and for how long. So I was very deliberate in my strategy, which was, don't just run as if I'm running each marathon as if it's a sprint and trying to get as fast as I can. For 2 reasons. One, I've never run a marathon before. The other was, even in my training, I had a lot of injuries. So I pulled my calf 5 times, and I'd had a pulled calf 3 weeks before I attempted this. My strategy was low and slow, a run to a heart rate. And my logic there was, look, if I could run in what's understood to be zone 2, so a low enough heart rate that I wasn't pushing my reserves too hard, given it's never been done before, I just wanted to maximize my chance of getting through in case there was a risk of either running out of energy because I hadn't done it, or mainly because I didn't want to pull a muscle and then have some physical reason that's independent of my demonstration around the energy reserves that would prevent me from finishing my marathons. My strategy was run to a heart rate. So I would run, and then if my heart rate raced away on me, I would back it right off until my heart rate came down again. And then whatever time it happened to be would be whatever it was. I wasn't trying to prove this is the best way to run marathons, and I'm very fast at doing so. That's a test for another day. I was very explicit around what I did. So my times were not particularly fast by any stretch. But in terms of relativity, my first marathon was my fastest because I was, pretty excited to get going. And that was obviously number one. My second fastest of all my marathons was my 5th marathon. which I think speaks sort of volumes to the fact that, look, I wasn't limping over the line. Again, if you want to look at each marathon time in its own right, you would say they are very slow. But remember, I did 132 miles. I didn't do 26 miles. Much the same as if you're comparing someone doing a 1,500 meter track event compared to someone sprinting 100 meters, I don't think it's a very valid comparison. I actually did an ultra marathon just over 5 days and paced myself accordingly. And to give you some idea on times, just so we know, my fastest of all my marathons was a bit over 5.5 hours. And then it ranged between 5.5 and a bit over 6.5 hours is what it ended up being.
Fair enough. And how did you feel going to that 5th day marathon? Now, obviously, you got an official marathon, so there's probably a little bit of adrenaline with different competitors and maybe more and more a different atmosphere. But how did you feel physically going to that?
Physically, I was, to be honest, I'd done a lot of damage to my ligaments and tendons. So I actually started that marathon with 2 sprained ankles, grade 2 sprains, because the energy reserves is one thing, but you wear out your body along the way. And it's not as though that being fat adapted means that you're invincible and every part of you just never breaks down. I'd run 170 kilometers, 120 miles prior to 110 miles prior to being at that start line. And my body showed the signs of wear and tear. So my muscles were very strong. I never had any muscle soreness whatsoever. So most people think after you run a marathon, can I sit down, get out of a chair, walk upstairs, all that stuff hurts? None of that was an issue. But my ligaments and tendons definitely struggle. It's like I say, if you figure out how to drive your car on one fuel tank for 100,000 miles, you've solved a really amazing problem and it's very impressive. But you're going to wear your brakes and tires out along the way. That has nothing to do with your fuel source. It's just you've done a lot of work here and your body just isn't adapted to be able to do that workload. So coming into Marathon 5, I was pretty broken because I had sprained ankles, and knowing I had to run 26.2 miles with sprained ankles on a day that was also a heat wave. So there were announcements prior to the event to say, everyone be very careful here because the temperature was reaching mid-90s, I think. So it was extremely hot. So coming into that, it was, okay, this is going to be pretty tough. It's going to be an extra element that is going to make it hard. But having the crowd and everyone, the buzz of the event was amazing. And having that to finish was absolutely spectacular. So I do laugh because I thought everyone at that start line was looking at it, being prepared to go, this is daunting. I've got one marathon ahead and all I can see is the start line. For me, all I can see on that start line was the finish line because I was like, right, I've done 4 here. I'm fully fasted. I've done a lot. We're home. This is the easy part, just getting through today.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like David Goggins-ish. I've talked to other people who have done marathons, carnivore fast. I've done another person who's done a 100-mile event. So I'm not totally surprised you could do this, but still, it's quite incredible, particularly if you're not even a runner to start with, which it's not even on my bucket list to run a marathon. I'm like, I have no desire, unless I'm forced at gunpoint. I don't think I'll ever run a marathon. But let me ask you about, what about, you mentioned heat, and obviously you think about hydration. How did you manage? Did you have anything special for hydration? Or a lot of people say I get cramps if I don't consume carbohydrates. And so how did you manage your hydration?
Yeah, so it was a big factor. The heat during that time was difficult. And over that full 5 days, it averaged sort of 90 degrees plus. So it was very hot. It was early spring and it was certainly not expected to be that hot. My intention going into it was trust my body because there's a risk of overhydration, particularly in that environment, where having too much water can be actually life-threatening if you're not balancing that out with your electrolytes. So I was very strict around having enough water, but trying to drink to thirst. And I was literally cranking as much electrolytes as I could. Now, what does that mean? I wasn't having any calories. It wasn't any sugary drinks. It was none of that. It was literally pure salt. And I'd have that in tablet form, or I would have that mixed into my drink bottles. Now, mixing in the drink bottle, I do that to taste, but it does make you thirsty as well. So it's a bit of a catch-22. When you're relying on your thirst and drinking salt water, it makes you thirstier. So and my view was the world's terrified of salt, but my understanding is a little bit different, which is, look, if you have too much salt, you can excrete it. You don't have enough, then you're going to have a problem, particularly given what I was doing if my salt levels get too low. So I did on the side of caution of having more salt than I probably needed. Now, your comment around getting cramps without carbohydrates, I didn't get a single cramp during the full 5 days. Not one. Not lying in bed, not running, not anything. Not even close. Not even, maybe this is something, I'll back it off. Not even close. Whatever I did on that side of things was actually really, really worked. And whether that was, I don't know which of those electrolytes was the one, but I can tell you that hand on heart, I didn't get a cramp. One of the sins I did make, though, was because of the pain in my joints while I was running. I did take an anti-inflammatory, which I now learnt the hard way. I had Dr. Paul Mason, who I believe you know. Many of your listeners would be familiar with him. He was my lead doctor that helped me with this. And I did take an anti-inflammatory without consulting him midway through one of my runs. And the night before my final marathon, I called him up and said, I think I've got a problem because I weigh as much as I did before I started all of my 5 marathons. And that was because of fluid retention, water retention. The anti-inflammatories I now know can cause some issues with that. His advice was, look, tomorrow, final marathon, it's going to be hot, but you need to avoid water as much as you can, or ideally finish the race dehydrated because you're oversaturated with your water. And I spent that night before the final marathon with my legs in the air, just draining fluid out of my legs because they were that swollen due to all of the water that I had taken on board. It wasn't a greatest way to prepare for a final marathon or any marathon, but I like to joke. I felt a bit like that Chuck Norris joke that he doesn't sleep, he just waits for dawn. And that was me the night before my final marathon.
And I know Paul. I've known Paul for years, great guy. And I remember, I think Ian Lake, as he did this, I know he had a lot of stuff he had tracked during the marathon. I think he might even want a CGM or something like. Were you tracking any additional data outside of, you mentioned body composition with DEX pre and post, but what were the things you were tracking, or if you did track anything during this experiment?
Yeah, I tracked everything I possibly could. Yeah. So I tracked the easy stuff using finger prick testing. I tracked my blood glucose levels. I tracked my ketones. I would do that before each marathon, after each marathon, and then each evening. And I had data before and after as a baseline and reset. So I got some fascinating numbers there. I wore a CGM, so I could tell you to the minute what my blood sugar did during this whole period. As I said, I had a full body DEXA scan before and after. Thanks to Dr. Paul Mason, I had full blood panels before and after. So I've got comparative numbers there. Plus, I tracked my electrolytes through some urine strip testing, which arguably is not the most accurate way to do it, but it does give me some good relativities if things were getting out of whack or if something was right. So I did all of that and obviously tracked my weight along the way. So I've got some amazing data out of all of that, which was really fascinating. I would be happy to share.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that because I wonder, one of the things I interviewed a guy named Paul Prinz, who is a researcher at Grove State, Pennsylvania, talking about endurance sports on low-carb and ketogenic diets, and this would certainly fall within that sort of purview. And he's saying that really because we hear about the marathon wall, and somewhere around mile 20, people run out of glycogen, and they just can't perform very well. They either can't finish the marathon or they really struggle with that. But he said it was really more based on, in many cases, blood glucose levels, which are more probably accurate with regard to performance when it comes to particularly low carb states. And when you were running, you were wearing a CGM, what was it doing? Did it go up significantly? Because I've seen athletes where their blood glucose is 300-400 milligrams per deciliter, whereas normal is 70 to 140 typically. And so what was going on with your numbers?
Yeah, so wearing a CGM, your numbers blip around quite a lot during the day just naturally. It doesn't matter what you're doing, it does move around. But what I can tell you is that for the entire period, it stayed within the normal range. I'm here in Australia, we talk millimoles per litre, so it was comfortably between 4 and 6 millimoles per litre. You might be able to convert that for me, but...
Yeah, I think that's a factor of 18 for us. So 4 would be about 80 and 6 would be about 175 to 115 or something like that.
So it was comfortably within the range of what my blood glucose is at all times. So no surprises there. And I did have my normal effects, which were that usual dawn effect. Around 6 a.m., I would get that spike up to 6, which would come back down again naturally. And the only time it really kicked up was at the end of my 5th marathon, which I don't know if that's a combination of the heat or what happened, but it got up to about 7 millimoles, and that was the highest it got for the entire time. But the thinking that, okay, because I didn't have carbohydrates and I wasn't eating, my blood sugar would struggle during that period was completely false. It was rock solid the entire time. My body was able to regulate that for the entire 5 days. And it was, fascinating to see. There's a lot of theory around what would happen, but I can tell you hand on heart what did happen to me, and there was never an issue with blood sugar.
With regard to the DEXA scan, because we look at, did you lose a lot of lean mass? Some of you say maybe you're metabolizing muscle to produce glucose.
Yeah.
What was going on with your
lean
lean
that's
mass?
Right. According to DEXA, I lost a total of 3 kilograms So what would that be? Convert that, that's 8 pounds, somewhere now around there.
6.5 pounds or something like that. Yeah.
So that's what I lost. Of that, 1/3 of it was fat and 2/3 were, according to DEXA, which is that lean tissue. Now, people often jump at that and say that's all muscle. It's not. It's the combination of glycogen, water, and lean tissue. It's the three of those. What I would love to do just as a comparative baseline, because I have seen some others that have done a 5-day fast with comparative DEXAs, and they've lost somewhere between 1.5 kilograms of the equivalent lean tissue without doing marathons. So when you're in that fasting state, your body is compensating and there will be that sort of depletion. But it wasn't purely all due to my energy requirements and me doing marathons. So I don't have a baseline, but across the whole 5 days, only losing that 3 kilos, 6.5 pounds, I think was quite amazing. And the fact that I only used 1/3 of that was my fat reserves, I think is also quite staggering, because the other part is there's not a lot of energy equivalent in the other sort of 2 kilos of whatever I was using, given some of that is purely water.
And you mentioned you were doing some ketone testing. So you said urine strips, so you weren't getting quantitative numbers. You were just getting.
So I measured ketones via urine strips and also via finger prick testing. So I rely on my finger prick. It was very accurate. And to give you a baseline, in all my training, pure carnivore for weeks beforehand, my ketones never rose above 0.1 to 0.3 millimoles per liter, which is like some people get obsessed about ketones. I don't think that's the right way to think about it. There are results of what's happening and your body's using those for fuel, but higher is not always better is my message. It's just an outcome. So don't attempt to get them higher. But I could tell you they never got above 0.3 for the entire period leading into my marathons. But then during my fast and my 5 marathons, they did increase quite a lot. So they went from 0.1 to 1.3, 2.3, all the way up to 4.3, which is, what's that? It's about 10 times more, 15 times what they were at my baseline level. So they absolutely escalated during that period, which also gave me a bit of confidence, because in my mind it was, look, ketones are going to be a fuel source for me as I'm powering my way through these 5 marathons. And knowing that they were there and available was providing me some comfort as we went through the 5 days.
Yeah, and that mirrors my own experience. I don't check ketones a lot, but when I do, they're usually not particularly high, because I think I'm chronically adapted to utilizing the ketones. You know, so what I can produce, I quickly utilize, because I'm not consuming anything other than carbohydrates, and so that makes perfect sense to me. So as far as, so you get done with the 5 marathons, you cross the finish line, how beat up were you? You had to sprain ankles and stuff like that, but as far as muscle fatigue, because my good friend Zach Bitter, he would do low-carb marathons and he would load up on steak afterwards, and he says recovery was significantly better, whereas in his high-carb days, he couldn't walk for 2 or 3 days. And so I'm curious, how long did it take your body to recover from this, obviously?
Yeah, so there's 2 sides to that. So from the muscle soreness, I had 0 at the end of 5 days, and absolutely no muscle soreness, like I said. And I describe that as, could I walk upstairs without pain in my, like the needles in my muscles that really tell me they're hurt and struggling? I had none of that, but I did have sprained ankles. So if you're walking around on sprained ankles, they don't disappear in a couple of weeks. It took probably 3 to 5 weeks, I think, to be able to get back to full mobility in my ankles. So that part was slow. So I was walking around like an old man afterwards, because my ankles just didn't work very well anymore because I'd worn them out. But in terms of muscle soreness and the recovery, I had absolutely no issue.
So you had full blood panels pre and post. I guess I'd be curious, maybe my anticipation would maybe you might see a bump in liver enzymes due to the stress. What were the things that changed over that period of time?
Yeah, there was a lot of things. I had Dr. Paul Mason on my team there helping me out with that. And so his feedback to me, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm just relaying in layman's terms what happened. But essentially he said, look, what he saw in my numbers there were some inflammatory markers, and yes, particularly with my liver numbers, but also my CRP. But what he saw, he said, it's absolutely not outside the realm of anyone that would have done the amount of activity that I had done, because it's not just the diet that puts stress on your body. It's when you run 132 miles over 5 days, you're going to cause a lot of issues. So there were some markers there that were surprising, or not surprising, they were increased and showing that my body had been through the ringer, so to speak. But some other things, so my fasting insulin level was actually quite stark. So it went from, let me just check, I think it was about 0.5, I think, all the way down. It dropped about 3 points. It was down to 1 or 1 and a bit, maybe just under 2. In that 5-day period, my insulin level dropped dramatically, which he was actually quite surprised about. He hadn't seen it move that big, particularly given it was already quite low in that amount of time.
Yeah, you think given that insulin is a storage hormone, you're not giving anything to store. It's just what do you really need it for? In some regard, at least that aspect of it. When did this event take place? Because I guess it would have been in the summer there, so maybe 6 months ago or something like that. How long ago?
It was a little bit longer. It was in September in 2023, so just on a year ago now. So that will be coming into early spring here down under in Australia. It was...
So it was that hot, it was almost 40 Celsius in September then, huh?
Yeah, it was insane. It's never like that, and it's starting to warm up now, but temperatures like that we don't normally hit until the middle of summer. So it was... I make the joke, I prayed that it wouldn't rain. I probably prayed a little bit hard there because I ended up with just getting blasted by sun and heat.
Yes, you got to be careful what you wish for. So Alex, how old are you?
I'm 43.
43,
yeah.
Okay. And so given that this has been a year, do you have any desire to continue running, or is it like, I've got that out of my system, or what do you do these days?
Oh, it's quite funny. So just like you, I had never had any intention to run a marathon. I think it's a terrible idea. Now that I've done this 5, the experience was life-changing for me. And it wasn't so much around just the physical part of it. It was what I fell in love with was there was a definite mental element to it, which was like in any endurance event, I totally understand why people do them now. It's because it doesn't matter how fit you are. If you're in those events, there will be a point for every single athlete or every single participant. At some point, your body will be screaming at you. Your mind will be screaming at you, telling you to stop, and you've got a choice. And that choice is give up and tap out, or choose not to listen and push on. And when you make that choice to push on, that's something you remember forever. And when you finish and look back and say, you know what, I didn't tap out when everything was telling me, because your mind has got some very compelling arguments in those dark times, that I didn't listen and I pushed through. It's okay. How do I translate this into the rest of my life? And a lot of life's problems become a lot more manageable once you know you've had the mental fortitude to push through. That part of it was like, oh, I didn't expect that. And that's the addictive part. And I'd love to do it again. We're not the 5 fasted marathons, but for me now, I've done something pretty tough here. What else can I do? It opens doors for me to go, okay, we're much more capable than what we think of. Or I think we are. So what's that next event, or what's that next time that I can push myself to really see where I'm at?
Yeah, I do a lot of training, and sometimes I get to where I rationalize and bargain with myself. If I do this, I can quit. I get exactly what you're talking about. There's sometimes when it really sucks, and you're like, man, I just want to. And no one knows, no one cares. Only you are the only one that knows what's going on, and you've got to overcome that in your own brain. Given that this was a very unique thing, there's not a lot of people that run 5 marathons, let alone fasted. Was this something that was there any media locally that anybody like saying, hey, this guy's run 5 marathons, or did anybody pick this up and talk about it?
There wasn't media at the time. And by design, it was, look, I didn't want to have the pressure of all of that because, again, I was a one-man band. I did have the help of Paul Mason and a few other doctors and people in the area to help me. But the idea of having coverage during part of it was a little bit daunting. I did look at getting it recognized by Guinness as a world record. Now, the pushback there was they've got some very strict rules around what they will and will not recognize. And part of that is, as a general premise, which is a very sensible one, they won't recognize any record where there is perceived danger to someone's health and there is a risk of them dying. Now, they throw in as part of their criteria any event or any attempt where there was an element of starvation. Now, what I did was not starvation. I did fasting, and they're very different things. But to call it the average person, it's very easy to confuse the two. So because they struck out, look, we won't recognize anything with a starvation element, this is going to be a little bit difficult. And it was also going to be difficult to prove because you need to have third parties with you 24/7 proving that I didn't put anything into my mouth. I know that I didn't do that, but in terms of that next level of requirement, do I have someone sleeping in my bed next to me during the night so that I don't know, to make sure I'm not doing this? And given how daunting the task was ahead of me, it was, look, let's just focus on doing this, because at the end of the day, I don't really care about the records. I'm just testing this myself to be able to say, hand on heart, I know now what it feels like to do this. And is it possible? Yes, it is. And also being a non-runner, and is it a way that people can everyone take something out of this? It's not this is a way to run marathons. It's just, who wouldn't want to have 50 times more energy in their day? Forget running. Just think about, look, I'm a busy mum. I'm working hard. I'm doing whatever in my day and I'm struggling. By doing what I did, I'm hoping that people would understand that, okay, I could translate some of this and I could use those energy reserves in any way that they would want to. So, yeah, no media coverage at the time, but since then there has been a lot of interest because people, it does pique their interest to say, I thought what you did, I thought was impossible. The fact you've done it now means probably I need to look into this a little bit more. And then that starts a very healthy conversation. It was, okay, you broke all the rules, you didn't carb load, and you didn't do all this stuff that everyone says is absolutely essential for any endurance activity. And because I broke those rules, people probably should start to look into how did you do this? And all I did was follow a different playbook. There are two ways you can play this game. I chose a different way, and I achieved an outcome that many would otherwise say is impossible.
So I guess you said you're inspired by Ian to do it fasted. Did you have any in your lead up in the year that you kind of trained for this? Was there periods where you did a lot of training, fasted training? Was that part of it? Just kind of get you used to that?
Yeah. So every single one of my runs I did fasted. So in that period, and I do that naturally. Like now I wouldn't even think about eating beforehand. There's absolutely no need. I'm not hungry and I never run out of energy. It just seems a bit silly to do that. But knowing what I was going into, I also put my mind at ease to be fasted. So I did do a few, call it test periods, where I might do a 2-3 day fast and run every day, but only run sort of 10 miles or maximum, and just to see how I go. And every time I felt great. And the more I wanted to do that in my training, preparing for it, I also thought, look, I don't want to do this too many times because I want to have as much fat reserves as possible going into this. So I don't want to be super lean and starve myself in all my training and then start with a very low baseline. So it was a bit of a balancing act there. Test enough to build the confidence, proof of concept, to be able to have the confidence to do the 5 in 5 days.
Because you said you use this kind of methadone zone 2 type of running strategy, running to heart rate type of thing. Was that something you also did in your lip in your training, or did you ever run faster?
I did run faster a few times just because, like everyone, you have that competitive element. So let's just see how far we can push this. Every time I did, I'd pull a muscle or I'd do something, and it was like, okay, I've got a bit of old man syndrome here, so I'm not as good as what I used to be. So I learnt that lesson pretty early. And so then it was, look, let's just do what I've set out to do here, which is run at that zone 2, train at the level at which I need to be moving at. And my focus was, how do I get my heart rate as low as possible? Obviously, the more efficient I was at a lower heart rate, the easier it would be for me. And on reflection, the things that I didn't do that I should have was more strength training, particularly in the areas that would be required to ensure that when I'm running, I was running efficiently and using the right muscles to do the right job. My running technique is terrible, and I got found out because of that joint pain, etc., because I had other parts of my body compensating because of weakness in, say, my glutes, or something wasn't working. So having the experience now, I would spend a lot more time focusing on the strength element to ensure that I was well balanced, because that would pay dividends regardless of just getting kilometers in the legs, because my body would then be efficiently moving as it was designed to do.
Now, obviously you said you got people like Dr. Paul Mason supporting you, so some people knew about it. How many people had you told you were going to attempt this, what would otherwise be seen insane thing, and what was the reception like? You're nuts, you're not going to be able to do it, or what was it? How much risk did you put on the line? Because when you announce it to other people, then you got to either put up or shut up. If you don't say anything, you can just...
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, I told everyone that was friends and family. It wasn't as I was announcing on social media or anything. That wasn't me. I'm not that kind of guy. But I told everyone that I knew, purely for that very reason. Like you said, if everyone knows about it, then there's that extra commitment that I have to get this done. If I just kept it to myself, then mentally there was a chance that I could back out because, what does it matter? But I told everyone in that year. The feedback generally from friends and family was, you're an idiot, you're insane, you're going to die. That was pretty stark. And people dismiss it saying, you're crazy. The more I saw I was training and I was serious, some people sat me down and said, are you sure you want to do this? But from the medical community, like the likes of Dr. Paul Mason, Dr. Peter Bruckner, I had also reached out to Shawn who's an endurance cyclist. He's very much a carnivore and has achieved some pretty impressive feats on the bike. I reached out to those guys and said, look, you're in this space, you do this. 1, is it possible? 2, what's the best way to go about it? And can you be part of my advisory panel? Obviously, Dr. Ian Lake being part of that too, having done it. Every single one of those guys said, no problem. Like, this is absolutely possible. And I've got full confidence in you being able to do this. So it was nice because I had both sides of that camp. It was they call it the educator, those that spent the time in the space said you will have no problem. But then I had the everyday mums and dads and friends and family also now pretty excited to follow me to go, okay, let's see if this is possible, because everyone likes something a bit crazy. And I didn't do it just to be crazy. I just wanted to prove it to myself more than anyone. And if I'm going to go to that amount of work, then let's get the data and happily share that afterwards to say this is how it all happened, because most people will dismiss it when they hear what I've done and say, no, it didn't happen. I think you're lying. I've got every bit of data here to prove it, including I've got footage of every single kilometer that I did. It's video of me clocking how fast I did and what my mood was. Again, just as that extra layer of evidence to say I actually did this.
At what point in the event did you realize that I'm going to be able to do this? Or was there like a point where, hey, this is no big deal? Was there, because obviously there's got to be some fear going into it and some anxiety, but then there's a point where you're like, hey, this is not a problem. When did you notice that?
So all the way through, I felt confident that I would be able to do it, but there was always, what's that element that is going to blow me or prevent me from completing it, which was, am I going to pull a muscle? Like that was the real thing that was going to think, oh, this could get really hard. So I didn't have that moment of satisfaction of I'm going to get here until halfway through. It's actually done. Until halfway through the final marathon. And look, a funny story from that too. I was halfway through my final marathon and I actually got a call from Dr. Paul Mason because he was in New Zealand. He was about to head back. So I just checked in how it's going. I was like, man, I'm literally running a marathon now. And he said, oh, okay, that's great. And he goes, look, this is pretty cool. This is pretty amazing what you've been able to do. And I'm really excited for you. So I was like, thanks, Paul, but I better get back to the job here. I'm only halfway through. But at that moment, it was, okay, we're going to get home here. We're there. It probably took to that point, but at every point, there wasn't a period where I thought, okay, my energy's low, I'm struggling, I've got to lift. Not once. Not once did I think, I'm starving here, I just can't wait to eat. And even when I finished my 5 marathons, I had visions of me in my mind's eye running across the finish line and tucking into a steak straight away just because I was ravenously hungry. I didn't eat for another 6 hours afterwards. I wasn't even hungry, and I forced myself to eat because I thought, you know what, I haven't eaten for 5 days. I probably should. So it was quite surprising. Those hunger signals just weren't there the entire time.
Looking at you, when you compare your data, and I'm sure you've had access to say Ian Lake's data, maybe Shawn's data, and there's been a few other people that have done similar things. Is there any consistency that you see? Can we say, because this is pushing human physiology in ways that haven't been pushed before. It's really an unknown. And so guys like, I'm sure Tim Noakes would have a great interest in this type of stuff. Maybe you communicated with him, maybe not. But can we say with any consistency that this is typically what happens in this situation, very low carb, no carb, fasted, endurance? Is there consistencies that we see?
Yeah, so the consistencies would be around that blood sugar, that it does stay stable the entire time. Everyone that's done anything close or similar to this has similar results. So the theory that your blood sugar is going to go awry during this period is demonstrably false. There hasn't been an example that I'm aware of anyone doing it with the approach that I've done where that has occurred. So that would be certainly one. The other is the fear of running out of energy, that when you are fat adapted, I'm not aware of anyone that's had that problem yet. And even those that are doing it at a faster click and doing it at higher intensity. And the other thing that kind of gets lost because people focus on pace is that by design, I tried to run at zone 2, but just naturally, again, because of the heat, it was so hot, my heart rate really raced up. So I was actually working, when I look at my data on Strava afterwards, I was zone 3, zone 4, and zone 5 for significant parts. For that final marathon, I was above zone 3 for a bit over about 60% of that marathon. That's being zone 3, and I spent a good hour and a half at above zone 4 and above. So I'm not a good runner, but was I working hard? It definitely was. So probably the consistency there was every one of those people that have played around in this space do get better results than what they would expect, even at those perceived higher intensities. That I haven't hit that limit yet, and I'd be fascinated to see just how far we could push it at those higher intensities.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I think is still being elucidated is what happens when you actually are chronically adapted. How long does it truly take you to get there? My own experience as an athlete is I break world records in rowing and stuff like that, which is very different from marathons. It's sprinting type stuff. So it's a very different physiology, but even still, I'm still able to put up the numbers even without carbohydrates. And when I wear CGM, my glucose is usually Sometimes for sprinting, it goes up quite high, which is quite interesting to see. The level of intensity is so much higher than zone 2. It's like all balls to the wall, everything you got. So given that you've got curiosity about what else can I do, is there something else on the horizon you're planning or thinking about, or what do you do these days?
Yeah, I'd love to. So in terms of my planning, one I would love to do would be that high intensity. So I'd love to do back-to-back sprints. One idea was if I could do fully fasted, full carnivore, could I do 100 back-to-back sprints in 100, like every minute on the minute, and see like how far could I go, what data would that look like? That's one idea I'm toying with. The one that's probably more immediate is I'm actually going to enter into my first actual event, an ultra marathon, which is a backyard marathon, a backyard ultra. For those that don't know, it's a pretty simple concept. All you have to do is run 4.16 miles on the hour, and that's it, one loop. Do it on the hour, but you do it every hour until there is only one person remaining. There's no finish line. It's just keep going. For me, it was like, this could be cool. I'd love to do it again as an experiment, doing it completely fasted as a carnivore and just go, everyone else here is loading up on their gels and everything on the way, away we go. Again, I'm not a runner, but look, let's just have a crack and see how far I can get and how far I can push it. And again, track all the data. I think that would be another fascinating one, because this time I'm going head to head with everyone else following a different strategy. And what would that look like?
Yeah, I think one of those recently done that. Some guy worked the world record running something like 400 miles, if I'm not mistaken. It was some insane amount, like he ran for 3 or 4 days consecutively or something ridiculous, crazy.
Yeah.
Good luck to you on that,
The
man.
current record for it, I believe, is 109 hours. That's insane.
Yeah. So that's like whatever that is, 5 days plus, something like that. Yeah, that's insane. Gosh, goodness gracious. So, since you've done this and now you've been a little more open, like you said, you weren't really looking for a lot of attention pre, but obviously afterwards you're doing a podcast now, so some people know about it. How much interest do you have people asking about this stuff at this point?
Yeah, quite a lot. Having done it, I wanted to get the message out there again. And my message isn't, look, this is the best way to run marathons. Look, it may be, but that's not me. I'm not a marathon runner. My message is, when you become fat adapted, your energy reserves go through the roof and you can access it. Use that how you want. And that's my message across everyone, to be able to say that, like, how can we do this? I do have a website, ketomarathons.com, where there's a lot of information there, including all of my data. And then on socials, I do post a lot of my things around what I've done and how I go about it and my thinking. Now, coming in terms of attention, there's two sides. There's the mums and dads that say, this is great, I need to look into this because I'd love more energy. But surprising to me, there's been some elite athletes in the marathon space, and even in cycling, in swimming, a whole bunch of things that have reached out to me and said, you know what, they can see the nugget in what I've been able to do, that little gold nugget or that piece of that takeaway, to say, if I could train my body to use fat more efficiently, I don't need to even avoid all carbohydrates. It just means that my baseline is now getting so much more energy from a reserve that I'm not having to top up all the time. This could be really something worth investigating. And likewise, some of those runners and some of those athletes that are genuine professionals say, look, jamming the gels in every hour or so plays absolute havoc on my stomach. And so I'm strategically planning about my dash to the bushes during all of these events. If I could get through this, achieve the same results without having to refuel every hour jamming these gels in, you've solved a huge problem for me with my gut issues, which in running is a very big thing. Any ultra runner would be aware of that. But surprisingly, I've had some people reach out to me that are swimming the English Channel, and they're saying, look, being in the water and bobbing up and down with a full stomach all the time is absolute torture. So if there is a way that I can minimize that discomfort because I'm more fat adapted, and look, they'll start with an approach which is just dial down those carbohydrates, not eliminate them completely, and that's totally fine. I don't have a view on that per se. It's like horses for courses, but there are some that say, no, you only have to have maximum carbohydrates and that's it. I'm never looking at anything. They're not the guys that are really interested. It's those that say, I used to do it that way, but you can address all these other issues for me, and it opens up a lot of opportunity. The final one that people have reached out were those that struggle with carbohydrate metabolism. So those with pre-diabetes and diabetes, when they're looking at the playbook saying, I actually really enjoy running and I want to do endurance events and I have to carb load, and what a disaster for me because I have to manage my blood sugars. For them, it's a bit of a shining light. They're like, okay, there is an approach and a playbook here that allows me to follow my passion and do what I want to do, where I'm not at having to do that fine, delicate dance around managing my own blood sugars, because I'm having to do that through means that are outside my body's normal mechanisms to do. For those people too, I've had a lot of people reach out and say, thank you, this is amazing. It's given me some inspiration to be able to follow this and learn more about it, because there is a way to achieve what I want to achieve without having to risk my health by jamming carbohydrates in when I know my body isn't in a position where it can handle them.
And we're about out of time here, Alex, but a lot of people ask me about, hey, how should I approach, because I'm not an endurance athlete. I never pretend to be. I have no desire to be, quite honest. I'm very happy being in that sprinting end of the spectrum. That's what I'm genetically and physiologically suited to. So that's where I prefer to compete where I'm best at. But given a lot of people want to do marathons, triathlons, endurance, what advice would you say on how to approach that? What are the things you've found, do's and don'ts, if you could maybe summarize some of that real quickly?
Yeah, so really quickly, it would be, number one, you train yourself to be fat adapted. So that would be just limit your carbohydrates, even if that's during your training block, because when you are fat adapted, if you do have carbohydrates, it's not as though you just turn the switch off immediately. If you do the work, set the baseline where you can use fat efficiently for a period, then when it comes to a race day, you can still have your carbohydrates, but you can dial those down enormously and still achieve the same level of performance. My advice would be, I'd love to see a genuine athlete try and do this and spend the time to be fat adapted. To get to the pointy end, 3 weeks gets you there effectively to start, but that's the start line. It would take 3 to 6 months, I think, of dedicated work to be able to really see the benefits. So stick with it would be my other thing. And then from there, toy around with, look, have some training runs and do it without carbohydrates and do it faster just to see where it is, and then experiment, because everyone wants that edge. And I think just purely ignoring it, saying it's quackery, is a bit silly, because there is a way that you can manage it that'll sit even in that middle ground is still a victory.
Awesome. Alex, thanks for doing this. If people want to find out more, where do they go? And remind me that I know you had a website. What are the social media websites? What do you got?
Yeah, so please check me out on my website, which is ketomarathons.com. I'm probably most prolific on Insta. My handle is @Keto Marathons. And I'm on X as well, which is Keto_Marathons. So they're probably the three biggest. But on my website, you can sign up. I do send out some information around what I'm doing and what I've done and some of my data. So if you are interested, please jump on there. Plus, I do have links through to some information around the low-carb sort of keto carnivore space. Just the resources that I've lent into over the years, Low Carb Down Under, some of your stuff, Shawn, and the rest, which is for those wanting to look into it, that's a good place to start to say, okay, this is where I can get some good information.
Awesome. Well, I just found you on Instagram, so I followed you over there, so it'll be good to check you out, see what's going on. What else is I going to ask? No, I think that's it. I got to run. Anyway, Alex, I appreciate it. Thanks. Good luck. And I'm sure you'll produce some more interesting stuff. So thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it.